Hi, what's up? I'm Channel Pup, and I'm attempting to be a mascot for the level-headed fanboy. And Spider-Man Lotus is now out. If you don't know what Spider-Man Lotus is, it is basically the most high-profile Spider-Man fan film to date. The hype for this thing was just colossal. And it's crazy to think it all began with a photograph of a really good Spider-Man costume. If I show you this picture of my Spider-Man mask, will you throw money at me too? Patreon link below. But this was basically to be the Spider-Man fan film that was made by people who were frustrated with the direction that the current Spider-Man films were taking. Wanting to move away from that kind of lovable dork, sort of, I guess, infantilized version of Peter Parker that we see in, say, the MCU, and go for the more rough around the edges depiction found in the late 1970s and 60s. And so naturally for Spidey fans, that was a very exciting concept. It would also be a film that focuses more on the drama of Spider-Man and less the action. But very suddenly, that hype turned into a lot of anger, as very dishearteningly, there were a lot of texts that came to light exhibiting some very racist behaviors from some very high-profile members of the cast and crew, including the director and lead actor. And of course, Spider-Man being this kind of symbol of virtue doesn't really kind of align with that. I'm not going to go really too far into talking about this, at least not just yet anyway. This video here isn't really about the controversy surrounding Spider-Man Lotus. In fact, I did make a video on that called Spider-Man Lotus is Ruining Fan Films. But ultimately, when it comes to a conversation surrounding racism, I don't really have much to add. It's not on me to play judge or jury on any of that because I am the wrong shade. I'm not someone who can speak from any experience firsthand of racism, so far be it of me to impose on anyone what to think. But of course, I'm a curious fella. I wanted to check out Spider-Man Lotus. I wanted to see what these guys had cooked up. Now, in the previous aforementioned video, I did say towards the end of it that I would not be reviewing Spider-Man Lotus. And as you can see, I am very much backpedaling on that, and I don't like backpedaling, but there is a lot of conversation surrounding this film for better or for worse. But there's not a great deal of analysis of the film itself, and I definitely see an opportunity to do that. I'll be honest, it just seemed fun, and I've had numerous people asking about it, so I can see that the interest is clearly there. Also, the ad revenue is a little low this month, and when a pup needs money, he needs money. But I do want to note that this video is in no way an endorsement of Spider-Man Lotus. It is more than anything else a critique. I am typically, these days anyway, very cautious about bringing any negative attention to fan films, be it through critique or otherwise, but I've done things the way I always do things when it comes to independent fan film projects. I have run my critiques by the creator of the film, and provided they are comfortable with it, that's the way I go. And I do this with any fan filmmaker. I did it when I watched the Spider-Man Noir fan film by Nut Allergy Productions. I did it when I watched Web of Spider-Man by Brandon Mello. I did it when I watched Spider-Man 2 Another World by Joey Lever, and I did it when I watched the Marvelous Spider-Man films with Michael Innamorato. And regardless of any controversy, I wasn't going to be doing things any differently when it came to Gavin Konop. I've got my principles when it comes to independent productions, and I plan on standing by them.
Hello there, I'm Captain America, and I'm here to give you a PSA. Now, if you love your country, you'll want to subscribe to Channel Pup. If you don't love your country, well, that's just too bad. But you can still subscribe anyway. Commies welcome. And of course, actually, we'll talk about that. But of course, nothing comes free in this country, except for freedom. And no exception is the Adobe subscriptions that Channel Pup needs to make these videos. So be sure to check out the Patreon link in the description below. And God bless America.
So what Spider-Man Lotus kind of sets out to do is to be an amalgamation of Spider-Man Blue and the kid who collects Spider-Man, while also making a lot of nods to The Night Gwen Stacy Died, Amazing Fantasy 15, and If This Be My Destiny. In many ways, it celebrates Spider-Man, as not only are a handful of Spidey's most iconic stories referenced here, but Spidey's history as a pop culture icon is also heavily explored. But this film feels less like a celebration of Spidey history so much as an intervention for Spidey. Less a love letter, more a letter of reassurance. Because, fuck me, this film is dour. Spider-Man Lotus takes the form of a grief drama, as its story hinges on the death of Gwen Stacy and its fallout. Peter is in a constant cycle of pushing away those who support him, and it all comes to a head when Spider-Man is called upon to visit terminally ill child Timmy. It serves as a turning point as Peter discovers strength within his friends, within himself, and within those who believe in him. Conceptually, it's thematically rich. What we have is a highly layered idea, as grief is a time for reflection, but grief also distorts perspectives. Because he was unable to save Gwen Stacy, the Odyssey of Spider-Man is called into question, with Peter reflecting on his origins critically, and he falls into this spiral of self-loathing, which means that, yes, he pushes others away. It's exacerbated by flashbacks to the night that Gwen Stacy died, as Green Goblin gets into Spidey's head, taunting him with the notion that Gwen's death is on his hands. It kinda shows Spidey that not much has really changed since the night Uncle Ben died, that he never did go on to become greater than his worst mistakes. And now he's being called upon by 10-year-old Timmy and his mother. Timmy being a terminally ill young boy who adores Spidey, who has in so many ways modeled his entire life around Spidey, wanting to be like him, and it's here where Peter learns of the positive impact that Spider-Man can actually have. Pairing the kid who collects Spider-Man with Spider-Man Blue was actually a clever fusion. It gives new meaning to this kid collecting Spider-Man, in that sense of collecting oneself, getting back on their feet. It also gives us a chance for Spider-Man to be saved by someone that he can't save. With it, Peter learns to stop pushing himself away and in turn others. There is quite a bit to appreciate about Spider-Man Lotus on paper. This is probably the most high-budget fan film that I know of, yet action is kept to an absolute minimum, instead bringing us a story that isn't bound to the codes and conventions of the typical superhero theatrical release. There is no Act 3 final battle. There isn't really a villain of this story, so to speak. It's an internal conflict, save for the opening scene of Spider-Man fighting against the Shocker, which is okay-ish. The Shocker suit is nice, and I do appreciate the small amount of normality we have here, but the overall blocking of this scene is pretty dull as Shocker spends most of this fight stood atop one single car, and so many of the action shots are incredibly tightly close up. So, for the story, we have the framing device of Peter recording messages for Gwen post-mortem, just like in Spider-Man Blue, which drives the story along and accents the overall feelings and emotions of the piece. I do feel that some of the narration could get a little bit repetitive and a little bit redundant, and I found myself kind of saying at times, okay, we get it, he misses Gwen, you know, like, quite a bit of this is time dedicated to just kind of repeating the same overall points. Oh, I think I just did a hypocrisy. On paper, Spider-Man Lotus is something special, and not for its budget, but just the very concept, serving as more of an emotionally meditative piece. But as I say, it is incredibly dour. It's by design. I don't really see many ways you could really circumvent the bleakness of this story here. I do respect the film for being an unflinchingly serious grief drama, but it doesn't change the fact that this is pretty miserable viewing, even by grief drama standards. It's one of those things where if the film is just too emotionally bleak, it's easy to lose sight of why these characters are worth saving, why it matters that these people are in such a dark place. And I think it's why the film didn't really resonate on an emotional level with me. And that sadness kind of just became more numbness to me. I didn't really feel myself wanting for things to get better for these people. I just wanted them to not be so awful to one another. I think the film did a nice job of conveying from the start that the lives of Peter, Harry, and MJ have been turned upside down and there's no going back. But the problem is that moving forward with these characters, there's this very apparent unwillingness to help themselves or help each other. It's a story that very much indulges the pain and apathy and the absolute lack of light at the end of the tunnel for so much of this film's runtime just doesn't make for very compelling viewing. But the absolute most fatal flaw of this film is that I lose sympathy for Peter Parker long before he's even close to overcoming his problem. there's a scene of Peter and MJ at Gwen's grave where the intensity of the conversation is just dialed way too high. So MJ goes to finally speak to Peter, and Peter goes absolutely berserk at her, stating that she never truly cared for him or anyone else, that she's not worried for Harry, she just wants to get back to being the life of the party, the center of attention. Now, in some regard, I can understand why Peter would have a version of this reaction, given MJ's bizarre priorities. Complaining that nobody wants to go out with her in the same breath as saying how Harry's gone missing, all while standing at the grave of Gwen Stacy? Yeah, it does make MJ look like a bit of a wet wipe. Made worse by her asking Peter if he wants to go to a party. Yes, MJ, good job. Gwen's died. Let's go party. But all the same, Peter's reaction here was so severe that he was just a few words short of basically telling her to kill herself. Now, I do admit that I am a little familiar with our writer, Mr. Gavin J. Kono. We followed each other on Twitter for quite some time before Lotus even made it into the spotlight, and we're both on kind of opposing ends of the conversation in regard to the ideal Spider-Man. Gavin being not a huge fan of the amount of Hollywood polish Spidey tends to get, gravitating more towards the flawed hero who isn't always likable, while I am your friendly neighborhood MCU Spidey lover, perfectly happy with our modern-day lovable dork. At the same time, though, I like tons of different approaches when it comes to Spidey, especially now. I'm by no means opposed to seeing the Spidey that matters the most to Gavin either, and I do want to preface everything I say here with, I appreciate that Gavin brought us the Spider-Man he's wanting to see in the movies, and he didn't polish him up to make him palatable for general audiences. All the same, in this case, you can call me general audiences because this wasn't very palatable for me. MJ was a bit off base, sure, but I'd rather see Peter walk away from the conversation or ask her to cut to the chase rather than laying into her like this, once again indulging that apathy in a way that feels more suited to Black Suit Spider-Man than it does to just regular Peter. Then in the following scene, Peter is grilling Harry for not attending Gwen's funeral.
It's about Gwen. Do you realize that?
Peter, his dad is dead.
She just died.
Peter, his dad is dead.
I know. Then where were you? Why didn't you show up?
Come on, Peter, come on, figure it out, dude! His dad is dead!
Sorry.
Now, playing devil's advocate here, maybe Peter was aware of the very complicated relationship between Harry and his father, so maybe he kind of downplayed this in his own head, but unfortunately that really doesn't come across in this film, and it's something where my familiarity with the comics is kind of just filling in those gaps, which I do think is a bit of a problem with Spider-Man Lotus. It does feel supplementary to the comics, which, okay, that's one of the benefits of making a fan film. You don't have to appeal so desperately to people unfamiliar with the character, and I think the opening and ending credits having comic book imagery kinda serves that. But it can be hard to know what media supports this film and what doesn't, what does and doesn't count in the world of Spider-Man Lotus. I think we needed more to allow the film to stand on its own, no matter how faithfully it depicts the characters and this world. Harry does eventually point out the obvious that his dad has died, and Peter backtracks a little apologizing, but come on, Peter, how dense do you have to be to need that spelled out to you? This will become the film's fatal flaw, the tone deafness of Peter Parker, and how he punches down in this story. This is where I no longer care that this is a man who's lost his girlfriend. Sadly, the most flawed aspect of Spider-Man Lotus is the handling of the kid who collects Spider-Man. Spidey arrives at Timmy's, and it all starts well enough as he shows Timmy his web shooter. I need to rephrase that, don't I? And Timmy shows him all around his various Spider-Man memorabilia he's collected over the years. We get a great sense for how much Spider-Man means to Timmy, this kid who doesn't even have the hope of waking up the next day because each day may well be his very last. And what Peter does here is very, very difficult to accept and to forgive. But before we get to that, we've got a couple of goofy toilet brain moments I quickly want to acknowledge.
Is this you?
Yeah, it was a project for school. We had to draw our hero, but I didn't really know what you looked like.
Oh my god, Timmy, why not just draw him with his mask on? What, is he stupid or something? So Timmy is showing Spidey how to play one of his video games, and wait, hang on. Alright, so the date of birth on Gwen's tombstone reads 2002. Assuming Peter and Gwen are the same age, Peter would also be born that same year or around abouts. Now, I noticed the cartoon playing in Timmy's room is the 1980s one, and okay, there's nothing to say that it's from the 1980s, but it is in 4:3, which would probably be a little unlikely in this day and age. But hey, moving past that, look at the title screen of this Spider-Man video game. Copyright 2008. This would imply that Peter Parker must have been at least 6 years old when becoming Spider-Man.
I got my powers from an accident. 5 years ago.
Whoops. Anyway, as Spidey plays a video game that predates him getting bit by the spider, Timmy asks what happened to the girl on the bridge, and all of that self-doubt comes flooding back. Now, I don't mind Spidey perhaps having a bit of a panic attack here. That's compelling stuff, but he really digs himself a hole here, and there's an instance where it looks like he's about to come to his senses, and then he just keeps digging. See, Spidey doesn't deny that he was responsible for Gwen's death. Now, Timmy understands that Spider-Man would definitely have tried to have saved her, and maybe, just maybe, I'd have forgiven Spidey for just jumping out of the window to collect himself, but no. He's not done until every shred of faith Timmy has in him is gone for good, dismissing all of his good deeds as purely stories, telling Timmy he's completely wrong about him. There's a moment where he pauses before telling Timmy he can help him to understand. I thought at this point maybe Peter was pulling himself together, maybe just a little, but no, he goes on to recount how he was never special, all of his power is attributed to a spider that died, how he was only in it for fame, and how he was responsible for the death of Uncle Ben. Peter, you dick. Now here's the thing. We're seeing flashbacks to Spidey going out in his Ditko suit, waving at crowds of people on the TV. It's everything I wanted. If you've ever seen Pup Pictures a Spider-Man reboot, you'll know that I've always wanted to see this explored, and this suit is exactly what I'd want him wearing. This is visually a dream come true, but it's framed by Spider-Man just refusing to let this kid have anything to be hopeful for. He's either being absurdly oblivious or just downright cruel. And being this oblivious is something my suspension of disbelief doesn't really allow. Spidey justifies this as Timmy being better off knowing the truth, but how? He's literally gonna die. One more day is not a guarantee for this kid, so what's the harm in him believing in anything? And the worst part is, Timmy's not even delusional. He accepts everything Spidey tells him, but still insists that what defines him is who he saves rather than who he loses. The kid handles it in such a mature way that I, for a moment, stop hating kids. Then when Timmy goes to show him his scrapbook, Spidey forces the book shut and bails. It's not until he's reprimanded by Timmy's mother, rightfully so, that he goes back in and makes things right. But this was just really hard to watch for me. I felt horrible for Timmy in this moment, as the poor guy was absolutely robbed of all hope by his hero, who also happens to be my hero too. So I can relate, and it's cruel. It's the equivalent to a mall Santa telling a kid Santa isn't real. Not only that, but he killed his wife and assaulted his dog, and that all of the presents are wrapped in dookie, and that the elves are all racist. I really wish Peter had come to his own senses. Spidey finds a way to get back up, always. But here, it's Timmy's mother shoving Spidey back up for Spidey to be like, I'm sorry. Everything I said was BS. I'm drink. Sorry for happen. I won't do it again. Timmy's pretty quick to forgive, as kids generally are around their heroes. Of course, Timmy does get through to Spidey now, and the story then takes the form of the original kid who collects Spider-Man. Spidey and Timmy read the scrapbook together. There's a small touch here that I love where Timmy tells Spidey he's scared. This was an excellent and very simple bit of dialogue. It really accentuates just how unfair these circumstances are. Timmy's a little boy who's been robbed of so much. So many stories he'd love to tell, so many things he'd love to experience, and it's genuinely the most tragic moment of the film. Before Spidey leaves, Timmy asks him, to know who he truly is. And so, Spidey unmasks. It's a nice moment, somewhat interrupted by me being pulled out of the moment immediately, when the kid completely just recognizes Peter as the bugle photographer. Like, sheesh, is Peter's face really something that would be out there in the publication? This just kind of struck me as a bit goofy. So Spidey leaves, giving Timmy hope that Spider-Man will always be around and will always be there for him. And then Timmy dies. They show his gravestone. Wait, hang on. So Timmy says earlier in the film that he's 10 years old.
I'm 10, but I'm turning... my birthday's in August.
But then on his gravestone, it reads that he was born in 2015 and died in 2023, which would imply that he's 8. Who taught you math, Gavin J. Knopp? I really disagree with the decision to explicitly state that the kid died. I wish, that had been left a little ambiguous, if he could have just made it to the credits at the very least. I don't know, it just feels grim for the sake of it. Maybe a little reactionary, I don't know. Yeah, we get that he's gonna die, but I don't know, just showing that he actually did die, I don't like it, you know? Now, while all this has been going on, MJ finds Harry at Norman's grave and takes him for a drive where she reminds him of his worth and how he brought the old team together one 4th of July to watch the fireworks over Manhattan. And then everything's pretty much solved between the two. It's very quick. But what I find especially funny about this optically is the placement of the 4th of July flashback scene. It takes place between Spidey trauma dumping all over a 10 or 8-year-old boy and Spidey getting reprimanded by the mother. The 4th of July scene is 7 minutes long, so what the hell was Spidey still doing in the house for 7 minutes after he left Timmy's room? What was he cooking? Was he just in the bathroom? Maybe just looking at family photos? What are you doing, Spider-Man? In the end, Peter vows to be Spider-Man, not because he wants to be, but because he has to be. And I'm not a huge fan of that line of dialogue. Being a Spider-Man is still a choice, and it's a far more triumphant note to have Peter make that choice while accepting what's happened, but go off, fella, I guess. As Peter records more messages for Gwen, MJ and Harry enter, where the three reconcile their differences and agree to be there for each other from here on out. They head to Flash's birthday, but the sirens blaze, and Peter knows there's somewhere else for him to be. So he suits up, where we get our triumphant final swing. Now, I can't help but feel that while having Peter respond to the sirens and suit up makes logical sense and doesn't outright contradict the previous scene, it definitely undercuts it. Peter, Harry, and MJ have all made the decision to be there for one another and not push each other away, to understand each other. And they're breaking boundaries here. Yet the note we end the film on is Peter buggering off from a birthday party without explanation once again. It would have just been far more thematically compelling to nix the final swing altogether. But I get it, you gotta get the final swing in there. It feels obligatory, you know? So that's Spider-Man Lotus. The intentions with this one are noble, but the execution is pretty ham-fisted as the film leans into the grim and depressing, and definitely dials the intensity up just way too high. Peter didn't need to be this oblivious and this callous. He didn't need to tear MJ a new one when she went to visit him at Gwen's grave. He could have shown some humility towards Harry. You can still have the character be flawed without being this much of an absolute dick. That being said, there are some very nicely directed moments. I love the scene of Harry in Times Square. You could feel just how lost and helpless and small he must have felt in that scene. And there's also the scene at the bridge, which is absolutely gorgeous, with the Lotus Spidey design looking its absolute best. I loved as the lightning cracked behind him, and the shots here, the close-ups of the eyes, and yeah, the special effects, they're some of the best you'll find in any Spider-Man fan film, with some incredible web-swinging sequences. That's a hard word to say, it seems. Incredible web-swinging sequences. And we gotta talk about the suits for Spidey. They're both wonderful translations of the Ditko and Romita designs. As I say, Shocker looks good. Goblin, not so much. I don't think that one really works. The mouth movements are pretty terrible, and it definitely it looks like a latex mask. I know that's what it is, and that's what it is in universe, but it screams amateur to me. I'd definitely rather see something solid or like a kabuki mask or something. Also, the lighting in this one, for the budget, it did need a bit of work, I feel. Indoor shots feel unnecessarily gloomy, and I feel like it does a disservice to Spidey's costume. When I say things like that, I am factoring in the budget. It's not something I'd necessarily critique otherwise. Now, good acting performances in fan films are quite difficult to come by, because good acting is a very difficult thing to achieve full stop, so I tend to not talk about acting, but given kind of the high-profile status of this one, and given the budget, and given that the actors do appear to be professionals, I guess I'll kind of cut it into kind of two categories. There is professional and non-professional acting performances. These folks do turn in professional performances. It doesn't change the fact that I do think Warden Spider-Man could be a little wooden at times. And MJ, I think she handles the emotional stuff well enough, but stuff outside of that, again, a little wooden. The standout actors in this one for me were definitely Harry and, surprisingly enough, Timmy. It's very difficult to find good child actors, but whoever it was playing Timmy did an excellent job. So the acting on a whole is solid. And the music, the score as well. I really like it, but I tell you what, I think I would have liked it more if we didn't have the references to the Spider-Man animated series theme and the 60s themes as well. It feels like there's already a theme to this music, and I think that stands on its own 2 feet, and just feels a little undercut by the musical references to the older Spidey media. I just think the original theme is much better. On a whole though, yeah, my biggest issue with this film is Spidey's crisis of self should have been internal, and him letting all that out on a kid with very little time left, especially when it was clear as day how important he was to Timmy, made Peter not just a flawed character, but one that was just nigh on impossible to root for at this point. I didn't really care what he'd been through now. If Timmy weren't terminally ill, I think this would maybe have been a bit more appropriate, but even then, he'd still be kind of a douche for trauma dumping on a 10 or 8-year-old. So I came up with an alternative route with an alternative 3-act structure. So here we go. Here's how I would have done it, but, I wouldn't have done it. I'm not the guy that made this film, so let's keep that in mind. It's all easy for me to say this in retrospect. So, Act 1, I'd say the needs of that are to establish the death of Gwen Stacy through the narration, have some flashbacks, etc., discuss where these characters are at now, the rift between them, Spider-Man is no more, MJ gives Peter the letter, and have a couple of scenes to introduce us to Timmy and demonstrate why Spider-Man is important to him. Then Act 2 would be all about the indecision, Peter reflecting on himself, evaluating Spider-Man as an identity. So, the question is no longer when Spider-Man goes to Timmy's, what's he going to do? The question is he going to go to Timmy's in the first place? If he doesn't think he's worth it, if he thinks Spider-Man's a bad thing, he's just not going to go full stop, which would be better than trauma dumping over the poor guy. We could have Spider-Man play out several scenarios in his head, so we could still get the scenes of him trauma dumping on Timmy, but they're strictly hypothetical. The thing is, you'd need another catalyst for Spider-Man to then reluctantly head to Timmy's. Maybe he's viewing it as a last hurrah for Spidey. A chance for Spider-Man to take his final bow, not fighting an enemy or losing someone, but going to give a kid a little hope. A chance for him to put Peter Parker aside and let Spidey bow out with grace. Or perhaps he gets another letter. Alternatively, maybe Mary Jane finds out he's Spider-Man. So rather than Peter recounting his trauma to Timmy, he would do so to MJ instead, and then she'd convince him to go see Timmy. It works a lot better because MJ is closer with Peter, and because she's not either A, dying, or B, a child, or worse yet, both. The climax of the film would be Peter going to Timmy's and seeing himself through Timmy's eyes, seeing what he means to Timmy, how the rest of the world views him, and how profoundly important that is for someone in Timmy's position. This would be Spider-Man's redemption, and then after that encounter, Peter would then reach out to Harry and MJ. I think this film would have really benefited from MJ knowing Peter's secret identity or finding it out at some stage in the film. This film has to bring these 3 characters together while also making peace with Peter, Spider-Man, and Timmy. And all that happens in the last 15 minutes of the film. But if MJ were to find out that Peter was Spider-Man, forcing him to stop pushing her away, that would mean that the last 15 minutes is more freed up to fixing things between the other characters rather than absolutely everyone all at once. This would also give the film a bit more relief, as at least we know Peter and MJ have each other to confide in. But Peter shows absolutely no intentions of making things right with anyone until the 1 hour 20 minute mark. And even then, he doesn't reach out to Harry and MJ. They come to him. It would have been far more thematically cathartic had Peter reached out to them. The ending as well. As I say, nix the final swing, or alternatively, let's say we saved Peter revealing his identity to MJ until the very end. If he were to look her in the eye and put his mask on in front of her, we would end the film on a note of Peter breaking down another boundary as opposed to being hindered by one once again. I think with these things in mind, we'd have a much cleaner version of the film. Peter still has that sense of self-hatred that he has to overcome, and there could still be little things like him pushing other characters away, but he'd just be that much more recognizable as Spider-Man to me and I think a lot of others. We'd have that nobility, that selflessness, and those aspects of Spider-Man would at least feel more intact. It would be a much more readable version of the character. I also think that there is a lack of agency in the characters. As I mentioned before, Peter doesn't reach out to Harry and MJ, they have to come to him. He'd have a lot more agency if he was at least making some calls or something. But then yes, there's also a lack of agency in the characters of MJ, Gwen, and Flash Thompson as well. We'll start with Gwen. Towards the start of the film, we see that Gwen is unhappy with Peter's flakiness. There comes a point where he's about to explain why he bailed on the cinema earlier, as he's hiding a ring to propose to her. But then he pusses out, and Gwen's just happy to go along with that rather than us getting any evidence of her being frustrated. She doesn't really feel like a person with her own feelings and principles at that point, so much as just loving girlfriend who exists to be loving girlfriend. Similarly, we have Mary Jane, who is basically treated like a punching bag for Peter. She later meets with Flash Thompson at a party where he's gassing Peter up as the greatest guy in the world, and MJ just listens and takes it all in, which admittedly it's respectable, but come on girl, have a little agency. If she had at some stage just said, Peter's kinda a sore spot for me now, Flash, I'd rather not, and then Flash just persisted, I feel like that would have gone a long way to making MJ feel more like a person and less like a pillow. And then yeah, Flash, the guy who talks about one and only one thing, Peter. Now, from what I understand, it was Gavin's intent for MJ to break free of damsel in distress status and save Harry in her own way. And while it comes across that yes, she did a lot to help Harry, there's not really much evidence at all in this film to suggest that MJ was ever a damsel in need of saving, aside from a newspaper clipping. She didn't really address that she was feeling that way either, so that arc sadly just doesn't come across. I think a lot of the shortcomings of Spider-Man Lotus as a film can be chalked up to inexperience. This was, to my knowledge, Gavin Konop's very first film. Now, I myself went to college and uni and I studied film, and let me tell you, a lot of my very first films that I made at 18 years old were dog dookie. A lot of the films I made in my 20s were dog dookie. My Spider-Man fan film is dog dookie. So I'm not saying I can do better, because making films is hard. You can make something that's thematically rich as hell, and then it just gets lost in translation. I can understand why Spider-Man Lotus came out the way that it did, and I can't say I would have necessarily done any better with making a film with this kind of budget. There's a lot of things budget can account for. Gorgeous costumes, good cameras, excellent CGI, but what it cannot buy is experience. The kind of experience that comes from just making films. Your first film should never be a 100k budgeted project viewed by 3 million people, including director John Watts and actor Andrew Garfield. From my experiences, my very first films were rife with misunderstandings, miscommunications, hubris, and by the end, apologies. I'd have actors wondering why scripts were playing out as they were so that they could understand the motivations and emotions of the characters they'd be playing, but I just thought, hey, why do you care? Just deliver the lines, bozo. I learned so much making my first films, and if you'd thrown all that money at me, I still would have made garbage, awful films. So regardless of how I feel about what's come out about the production of this film and the people behind it, as a piece of fiction, I did want to give it the benefit of the doubt. Overall, it's pretty good, all things considered. Of course though, yes, we do have to touch on the controversy surrounding the film. I didn't really have much to add to this conversation. I'm just the wrong shade to really speak on that topic. But I do want to take this moment to say that I fully recognize the validity in being unwilling to separate art from the actions and words of the artists, and it's never going to be up to me who does and doesn't forgive. If you're disheartened by everything that came out prior to this film's release, I'm with you. I'll make absolutely no excuses or defenses for it. And now a laundry list of more and more allegations are coming out, from the use of alcohol to motivate actors, to acting supervisors and certain actors being predatory and actors being badmouth, and Jesus Christ, it just seems to go on and on, unending. And it's really unfortunate. But I am once again going to have to play devil's advocate here. Gavin was 18 years old while this film was in production, and an 18-year-old is not going to know how to deal with when a member of their crew is unsavory, nor are they going to understand how to talk to and talk about their actors. And I can speak from experience there. It would be incredibly hypocritical of me to condemn that without acknowledging that as well. In my own cases, I did of course make sure everything was made right after the fact with the individuals involved, because I always set out to build more bridges than I burn. What Gavin needed more than he needed 100k was adult supervision and privacy, but more than that, he needed someone to tell him to just try some low-profile shorts before diving into the world of crowd-funded high-profile projects. That way he could better manage the kind of attention it would receive. And I gotta accept a little responsibility for that. To have your very first film get this much exposure, having the eyes of millions watching your every movement as you do this for the very first time, was never going to be a healthy position for anyone to be in. Back when the suit was first revealed, I made a video on how cool it looked. I also donated to the fundraiser. You can find my name in the credits. For those of us that entered a state of hysteria when this film was shaping up prior to all the controversy, we probably should have seen some foul play coming when we gave a teenager that much money for their very first film project. Directing is all about knowing how to manage people and harbor a safe and good environment. Spider-Man Lotus was just too big, too ambitious of a project for someone so inexperienced, and I do feel responsible for playing a part in harboring that environment. In the end, I hope peace is made, and that any and all wounds caused by this production or by this film or by the people behind it may heal. I hope those affected by the words in the leaked messages can find peace, love, and kindness from the right people. I hope that Gavin and Warden can prove to the world that they're capable of outgrowing the offensive things that were said in the leaked text messages. I hope they can go on to make some smaller projects that demonstrate and hone their abilities as filmmakers. I hope that any genuine predators in the cast and crew get hit by a bus. I hope that anyone affected by any foul play during production is able to recover and go on to enjoy a fulfilling and successful career. And I hope that one day we can look back at Spider-Man Lotus as just another entry in the canon of Spider-Man fan films. And most of all, I just hope we've learned something from this. Now, while you're here, I do understand that this project, with its high-profile status and big budget, did attract some new people to fan films as a subgenre. So I want to take a moment to push forward some terrific Spider-Man fan films that I highly recommend that demonstrate excellence in filmmaking and storytelling. The marvelous Spider-Man 3 Empire of Blood by Tough Cookie Media tells a story of Peter Parker confronting and overcoming his demons as he faces off against Cletus Cassidy in a bid to rescue his best college friend. It's a film made with zero budget and a profound love for the character. Michael Inamorato makes a wonderful Spider-Man, and the story is full to the brim with heart. Spider-Man Field Day by Jasper Capelad features Spidey and a young Miguel O'Hara working together to find Miguel's missing father. Miguel helps Spidey to fight crime after his webs run out. Running at a swift 20 minutes, this briskly paced kinetic adventure filmed on an iPhone reveals just how much can be done with very little resources. Spider-Man Lost Cause and Spider-Man 2 Another World by Joey Lever need no introduction. The adventures of a British Spider-Man, drawing inspiration from the Ultimate Comics and The Amazing Spider-Man, are feature-length labors of love that are brimming with bombastic energy and homemade charm. Incredibly endearing and fun to watch. They don't really need my endorsement though, given that they're some of the most well-known Spidey fan films to ever grace YouTube. But they've inspired a generation into making fan films, and I adore them for it. Also, Joey Lever, the film's director, was the star of my uni finals project Burrito de Mano and landed me my very first TV industry job. So here's to you, Joey. To say you've nurtured a great community is an understatement. Intractable, a Spider-Man story by Heath Gleason. Like Lotus, it's a grief drama first and foremost, but Heath's unique reimagining of Spidey makes for fascinating and gripping entertainment, demonstrating a great deal of filmmaking skill with zero budget. Truly an auteur piece in the Spider-Man fan film canon. Spider-Man Lives, a Miles Morales story by Bard Tales, features Miles shortly after gaining superpowers, confronting a gang of criminals in an Oscorp warehouse as he lives up to the legend of our now departed Peter Parker. It's got a lot of charm and the action is brilliantly executed. Spider-Man Power and Responsibility by The Lonely Spider. This film features the formative years of Spidey after the death of Uncle Ben as he takes on the Sinister Six, who are brought to life in a wonderfully homemade fashion. A Friend Called Spider-Man by B. Stella Productions features our friendly Spider-Man visiting a suicidal teenage girl to help her through her troubles. It's a sweet film that highlights the kinder side of our beloved wall crawler. Miles Morales Final Day by Joshua Williams features Miles Morales and Gwen Stacy taking on Morlun as they set out into the war for the Spider-Verse. It's full of fun stylistic choices and it's great to see Miles' Spider-Man and Gwen's Spider-Woman in live action. The Amazing Spider-Dad by Mike Wilson was made in tribute to his beloved son who fought an 18-month battle with cancer before passing away at an incredibly and unfairly young age. Not only is this film full of heart and warmth and just made out of pure love, but the cinematography and special effects are just terrific too. Rest in peace, Jaden, you little hero. If you are intrigued by the concept of Spider-Man fan films, be sure to check all these out. These are must-watches, and they're just terrific. They deserve all the love in the world. I'm sure there are many more excellent fan films to check out, so be sure to post your favorites in the comments below. I know I've missed a few as well, these are just ones off the top of my head, but I just wanted to take this opportunity to shed a little spotlight on some other great fan films. And as always, if you enjoyed this video and you want to support more like it, be sure to hit subscribe, hit the like button. In the description below is a link to the Patreon, where for as little as $1 a month, you can get your name in the credits of my videos, as well as just making me very happy and helping me afford my bills, which I dearly need to afford. And of course, an extra special shout out goes to the patrons in the $10 tier. And if you don't know their names, well, you're gonna know them now because their names are Glad Goku, Sharif, Dare Denny, Kale Bennett, That Jordo, Kinky, Legendary Ray Ray, Dr. SP, Sergio, Cyrus the Skeptic. Did you know the skin on your elbow is called a weenus? And then for the patrons in the $5 tier, we have SSS06, Dazzle Fizzle, and Vera Wild. Thank you all so much for your generosity, and to all of you at home watching, thank you so much for doing so, and have a great day.